Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to Cave of the Cross Apologetics. I am Patrick, and if you're wondering, why another interview? What's going on? Is Tony leaving the show? Well, Tony is fleeing to land of freedom of Texas, and so I wanted to give him some opportunity to get settled in. So I've asked a few friends. Troy Frazier was kind enough for the past couple weeks to provide some content for our show, and that was amazing. And
amazing episode. If you missed it, let me say, as someone who is not obligated to say this, that it was an amazing episode.
It was so good. You do interviews and you kind of know where things are going, but he's just so knowledgeable that he could have taken it anywhere. And so I've done the same thing for a person in a different field, but we've also been talking for an hour and a half on top of it. And so we finally decided to push record. But I'm joined by my friend, Jeff Park. He's one of the co-hosts of Anarchist Bible Study podcast, who we've had on the show before, episode 150 and 151, to talk about practicing good biblical hermeneutics. But on top of that, he's also the executive director, which I think you need, if you're going to create an organization, you should give yourself really high acclimates for more than executive director. But he's the executive director of the Alberta Parents Union, which is an organization of Alberta, and that's Canada for our U.S. And for U.S., that's the country above us, and above us, I don't mean cardinally. I mean cardinally, but not polarly. And so it's a group of.
I'm proud to live in one of the world's top countries.
That's right. It's a group of Alberta parents advocating for the best possible education of all Alberta students, and to advocate for an excellent parent-led, innovative, and equitable education system, which recognizes the importance and the value of choice. So Jeff has an extensive also background in working policy research, advocacy, policy campaigning, and he lives in Calgary with his wife and 4 children. Thank you very much for coming on the show, Jeff, and talking to me, as always.
Thanks for having me and putting up with my multiple interjections before you introduced me.
That's all right. You try and hide it as a YouTuber of who's this mysterious person? But then the thumbnail tells you exactly who I'm talking to. The description tells you who it is. So yeah, I've stopped hiding my co-host for interviews now. All right. So we're an apologetics podcast. So why are we talking about education? So that's obviously what we're talking about. If you read the description, why are we talking about education? So the role of apologetics is defense of the faith. And it's more than just proving that Jesus rose from the dead. It's a defense of the entirety of the Christian worldview. Hopefully, if you've watched enough of our episodes, worldview tends to be a key word that we tend to say a lot. So things like how to baptize, who takes communion, what is self-defense, the advocacy of abortion. All these require a Christian response. So what does God, who communicates to us through his word, say about X is an important theological and apologetic defense. And when talking about apologetics, to deny things like theology or church history or hermeneutics, I think devalues what apologetics actually is. So one of the things you probably didn't think about until you had kids, and that tends to be the case, at least for me, is what education should look like from a Christian perspective. Probably more on the forefront from the global lockdowns. And again, this is where I think the left, they always want to personalize, people. And so they term things with personal attributes. And so I don't call them COVID lockdowns. I don't call them the pandemic lockdowns. They are global government lockdowns. That's the badness of it. And we can debate on that. So we're going to talk about religion. We're going to talk about politics. If we have an episode on sex, we're going to hit everything that you're not supposed to talk about. So we'll have to find an episode to do that as well. So Jeff, you're going to provide a one-size-fits-all plan for every single person in the entire world, and anyone who doesn't fit the mold will be labeled as subversive and ostracized from society. So how are we going to accomplish that?
We're not, Patrick.
Oh, okay. Right. You're advocating for choice. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, wait. This is one of my rare cases. That's centralism, Patrick.
See, you can do that meme with me and have it make perfect sense.
Yeah. And that's the opposite of what we do with the Alberta Parents Union, and certainly what I've devoted my life to is that, look, children are not one size fits all. If you think that they are, I recommend having more than one child, right. And that will disabuse you of that notion. I have 4, and there are 4 sizes to fit my 4 children. So children are not one size fits all. So the education of those children. So when we're talking about education from a Christian perspective, we are talking about forming souls for eternity, which in the meantime will need to prepare themselves for death by what they do in this life and what they and what message they will hear. Well done, good and faithful servant, when they arrive. And obviously, both Patrick and I come from a monergistic perspective where we don't think that that's where that's works based, but that does not remove the obligation for parents, as we are forming souls for eternity, as we are. The Bible is very clear. We are supposed to weaponize our children against the enemy in a certain sense. It calls them arrows, like that we are actually supposed to be sending children off to battle. And we'll probably get a chance to talk about some of the things that does not mean, but that we are preparing warriors to advance the cause of Christ. So then, because if you're preparing and crafting a soul for a battle, first of all, the battles might look different. Second of all, the souls definitely look different. So since children are not one size fits all, since the needs that the Lord might be placing upon the lives of your children are not one size fits all, then their education, their preparation for that cannot be one size fits all. And so one of the first mistakes we can make from a policy perspective is to assume, and this is something that I have to be careful with, because I frequently use in my work, I frequently use the word excellence or the word quality. And if you're not careful, we've been so indoctrinated into thinking that means one thing, one uniform, exact thing. And it's a measure on a scale of 100. Quality is a measure on a scale of 100, and your school is an 89.9, and that's good, but it's not as good as the school next to yours that's a 93.3. When really, that is not what I mean when I talk about excellence or when I talk about quality. Mm-hmm. And I've got to be careful sometimes, because it's so easy, especially because even some of my own allies, like Austrian-style economics, for those of you who are fans of Bob Murphy, who famously, a famous guest on this very show. Friend
of the show, yes. Yeah,
I think he really made his name off of his appearance here. And so you'll hear him talk about the Fraser Institute. That's a Canadian Austrian economics style. Not everyone who works for them is an Austrian, but a pretty strongly Austrian economics style policy institute think tank here in Canada. And it's very common that the Fraser Institute, the Atlantic Institute, a lot of our sort of allies, ideologically or politically, will speak of quality or excellence as if it's one thing. Because look, I get it. It's, you want to be able to measure it and say, these schools are high quality, these schools are low quality. You want to be able to put them on a chart. You know, you want to be able to run regressions, and for regressions, you need numbers.
One of the things that you do when you buy a house is the realtor usually says, and this isn't a really good school system, which is a measurement of quality. And so you go, well, I really like this house. I love this house. There's nothing I would change, but the zip code puts me in the bad school district. And so we can't move here.
Yeah. Now, there is a solution to that problem.
and Michigan, if you're in Michigan, does have part of that solution as well.
Yeah. And Alberta has quite a bit of it. In fact, most people don't know where their public lines run unless they're okay. So if you live in the rurals and there's only one high school that you could pour into, then you know which one is your public high school, and you're sort of zoned for it, and that there's not really another option except for the Catholic, which is an advantage in Alberta, is that we have parallel public and Catholic systems. But so that's so that's one way. But then because and that's just to say that because we have what you would call intra-district choice, where yes, you're residentially assigned to a school, but you can go wherever you want, except for certain. And then, so then the other kind of people who would, who would know what school they're residentially assigned to are people who live in a big city, in a school division, in a district, and within lines that basically everyone wants to leave. And not everyone is going to be allowed to. Mm-hmm. So those are the other people who are going to realize that there are lines. But most Albertans don't even realize the lines exist. So that's less of an issue. Although it definitely can be an issue if realtors who are selling you a house inside one of those lines that everyone's trying to leave, they will have to tell you that okay, so if you have kids, here's a problem. Like, anyway, so absolutely. But I try to be more careful now, especially I went to kick off my organization. I went on a 23 stop tour of Alberta. Went to all 5 corners of our province. If you struggle with that one, pull up a map of Alberta. My wife and I met in Virginia, and we always told people, we would always talk to Americans and try to help them understand where Alberta was. We'd go, they'd go, okay, I don't know where Alberta is. Okay, do you know where Montana is? Okay, do you know where South Dakota is? Okay, do you know where? And then we'd find the closest state that we can. Okay, and then northwest of that is Montana, and then across the border from that.
See, I always knew Yukon from reading Calvin and Hobbes. So.
Okay, there you go. But anyway, so I always try to be careful now. Especially after having gone on tour and had parents not understand what I mean by these words, that when I say quality or I say excellence, I mean whatever the family wants to get from the school is being delivered in ample supply by the school that the kid is at. That's what I mean by quality. That's what I mean by excellence, because it is too easy to and we'll probably get into this a little more, but we thought we were home educating all of our kids, probably, right? Like we just assumed, because of probably some things we're going to talk about. We just assumed that's probably the most logical outcome for us. Then we had the first one, and she turned out a lot like me, and we went, and one of those features, a lot like me, is will not learn things, take knowledge, learn things from her parents. Very resistant to knowledge gained from parents. Very, very willing to take the exact same thing heard from parents and apply it when heard from someone else. But even if she is learning something from parents, much more resistant to showing that she has learned that thing from parents. So a very sort of defiant personality in many ways, which I credit for a lot of the good qualities I now have. So I'm very capable of being patient with that in my child. Although I do sometimes say to my mother, if you have been praying for me to have a child just like me, please stop. But
or you're going to have to hire Blippi to do the teaching.
Yeah. So then we immediately went, okay, no, we're going to have to find a Christian school for this one, because it's just maybe, and like I went to Christian school for a while, and then was home educated for a while, and then went back to Christian school to play football, and other things. But so there's absolutely that possibility with our eldest as well. But we immediately realized that that our education plan couldn't be one size fits all for this kid, and that we needed to find a good Christian school that we could really trust and that we could get super involved with, because we still we'll get into this more, I think, but it's still our responsibility to educate our kids. That doesn't mean that we can't seek help. So for instance, reading the scriptures, whose responsibility is it to educate the kids? It would be hard for you to come away from the scriptures without coming away with, it is the father's responsibility to educate the kids, right? It is dad's responsibility, because almost all the education instructions in the whole Bible, almost every single one of them, are to fathers. Fathers teach your children. Fathers set up these monuments so that when your children ask you, fathers, about what happened here, you can tell them. Or fathers, do not exasperate your children. You know, one of the reasons children might get exasperated is because you're trying to teach them something, right? And so there's definitely this strong assumption that it is the responsibility. It is the authority of the fathers to teach their children. Now, even in the vast majority of home educating families, it is the mother who is going to teach their children. Now that I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm saying the fact that it's the father's responsibility does not mean that he cannot delegate that responsibility. But ultimately, if my kid does not come up in the fear and admonition of the Lord, it is ultimately my fault. It is ultimately my responsibility if that child is not raised in the Lord's fear and admonition. And there's a certain extent to which I can't even pawn that off on my wife, much less a teacher I hired at the Christian school. Right? So, and to the same extent that the church that we go to, where we learn the scriptures directly, that is ultimately my responsibility. Now, I don't do most of the preaching and teaching at my church, right? So that's mostly happening from the pastors and elders of the church, but which are the same thing in my view, by the way.
Right. Yes.
But anyway. But it's ultimately my responsibility that my family is learning the Word of God correctly, and that would be the same no matter no matter where you go. So that for us, it was very important then to find, yes, a school that was going to teach a Christian worldview, that would expect Christianity to permeate the curriculum, which is, by the way, required for the kind of school that this is required by the province of Alberta, that if they are going to set up an alternative program, which is what this is called, if you're going to set up an alternative program, that the purpose of your society that you form the alternative program around cannot be incidental to the education. It must permeate the curriculum. So if your society is a Christian education society, Christian education must permeate all of. I'm like, this is great, right? Like, this school is legally required for Christianity to permeate all of the classroom instruction. And
who knew Alberta would be promoting Christian nationalism?
Yeah, no kidding. But quick side note, like I'm reading a really good book right now that's not in arm reach, but I don't think it is. Nope, that's not it. Reading a really good book right now that is on my microwave in the kitchen. That is about one of the guys who guided us through this debate in this country. We saw the United States Civil War and said, okay, these guys were basically all Protestants, basically all came from the same two islands in the Northern European Sea. Basically, they've got they've got all these same demographics. And then they said, we're going to have a one-size-fits-all public school where everyone's going to learn the same things, and therefore we'll all get together, get along so much better. And then you had this giant civil war right before the founding of this country. and they go, so maybe not that. Maybe let's do something else, right? And so the founders of this country started with the idea of Catholic education and Protestant education, and that they would be, and that we wouldn't pretend that you could have secular schooling for sure. We wouldn't pretend that you could have schooling that is neutral between these two major faith groups, but that then every faith group should have its own. And then it was built in from the very beginning that through the same system where enough Catholic families could petition to start their own school division and run a parallel system with tax money, that a Protestant denomination that felt that their needs were not being well enough served by the public schools could do the same thing. So then when in what's called in this country the Silent Revolution in the 60s, when religion is stripped out of the public schools, they said, okay, rather than just instantly have 30 separate systems where all these Protestant denominations are going to form their own schools now because we've stripped it out, we'll formalize this into this alternative program system, which is going to give you 100% of the per student funding. You can negotiate with your school board for capital funding and transportation funding and teacher pension funding and whatever else. Hint, hint, negotiate with the school board means you get nothing, but whatever. And then whatever you can form an alternative program around whatever you want. It can be around Christianity. It could be around a particular denomination of Christianity. It could be around hockey. It could be around learning a foreign language. It could be around learning French, which is not a foreign language in Canada. So you can form you form a society, a charity around the topic that you want. You hold annual general meetings where you can democratically elect the board of that charity. That charity is responsible to make whatever the purpose of the charity is, permeate the education at that school. So they're responsible. So they're responsible to make sure that the mission of the society is carried out by the school, and the school board will kind of get out of the way and administer the things that are going to be the same at any school, regardless of ideology or purpose, but let the society guide the things that are integral to that purpose. That was the idea. And I think that was brilliant. is not pretending that there can be this neutral public schooling system was a huge, and other provinces have forgotten those lessons and have abandoned those lessons. Most notably Manitoba, which has been a perennial laggard in education ever since. Basically, they fought for years and years and years about getting rid of their separate systems. And then once they did, they have lagged behind the rest of the country basically ever since in education. So it turns out one size fits all doesn't work.
Well, it's interesting too, like the Civil War, yes, it was about slavery. Yes, it was about, a whole number of things. Absolutely. But the centralization of power of sustaining the Union, a one size fits all, or allowing what the founding of the United States as in plural, to go about their own way to such an extent where they could remove from the federal part delegated powers. They could remove that at any time, because why else would these hotly debated ratification debates not allow for that to come in? Like, no, once you sign on the deadline, you're forever indentured into federalism. And so you had 600,000 people, brothers, cousins, fighting on two sides of the same line for slavery, anti-slavery, for Union preserving, for Confederacy preserving, and Confederacy also held slaves in the form of having people, sign up for their war too, and freedom from the government, except for when we come in and steal wheat and corn from the fields. So neither side was good in that one. But we saw centralization happen there, and saying, hey, maybe the Confederacy had certain things right, where you could alleviate this type of destruction and having multiple systems in place that were decentralized. And Canada never had to fight a civil war to outlaw slavery. They essentially paid off slave freedom and made it illegal after that, if I remember my history somewhat. Canada
never had this, but yes, Canada as a part of the British Empire, yes, that was the British approach.
Yeah.
No one but the United States fought a war to end slavery, by the way.
Right. Amazing how that worked. So we have more responsibility than making sure our kids get to the bus on time and making sure that their homework does. And you were talking about.
I was doing a side note. How I got into all this, I was doing a side note from saying, so not only did I want to make sure that Christianity permeated the curriculum, which is the policy term for exactly what I wanted, the government's own words for exactly what I wanted. But the other big requirement that I was looking for was to make sure that I could talk to my kids' teachers, that they were highly respectful of my authority to guide my own child's education, and that they would show a lot of deference there. And so to me, that was kind of the threshold, that the minimum viable product that a school outside the home needed to provide for me to be for me to be comfortable that my duty to educate my children was being well delegated there. I do want to say that so I've made the one analogy about church, and it's like, so you've got a really good question for if there's some sketchy stuff coming from the pulpit at your church, when do you pull your family out? And good Christians can disagree about the threshold where you leave. Like I feel very strongly that you don't leave a church without exhausting all other possibilities.
And talk to your pastors and elders.
Yes.
Don't just leave.
Yeah, you absolutely will. And so in our church, we have a covenant that you agree to join, saying that if you leave, you're going to, as soon as possible, join yourself to a like-minded fellowship and let us know about it, because we are responsible to care for your soul as a member of this church. And so and so it's never done lightly. But obviously, yeah, there's a certain line where if the preaching from the pulpit is off, you have to leave. And good Christians can disagree about where that line is, but we can't disagree about whether there's a line. Right. And I would make a similar analogy to education. I wanted to make one other one, is also as the father and leader of my home, it is also my responsibility to defend my family, to protect my family. And I know, especially in our anarcho-libertarian world, there are lots of people who would say that is a non-delegable responsibility, that I defend my own family with as much firepower as I can possibly amass. and that is my responsibility to do, and I'm not going to delegate it to a cop. I'm not going to delegate it to a neighborhood watch. I'm not going to delegate it to a security company or to a dog, right? Like, and I can totally respect that position. I do not think that it is that it would be right for Christians to get super dogmatic about, and therefore every Christian must hold the exact same view about how to protect and defend your family there, right? It's that it is that I can totally follow the logic. I'm responsible for defending my family. I can't trust anybody else ultimately with that responsibility. It's even if it were delegable, it's ultimately it's my fault if something goes wrong. It's my responsibility. I can't abdicate responsibility, even if I can delegate the execution. So ultimately, I'm going to take that upon myself directly, and I can't argue with that logic. It's nevertheless, we can see how it would be unhealthy to say, and therefore, to go to this church, you must believe that you spend everything left over after clothes, food, electricity, and housing. You spend everything left over on ammunition, and that's that you are amassing the largest stockpile of weapons you can to defend your family. Like, there isn't a church. I don't think there's a church that does that. I bring this up only because there are some churches that get pretty close to that on home education.
Oh, sure.
And I think that's unhealthy, even though, again, 100% see the logic. Thought it myself. Thought all my kids are going to be home educated, and I would have said this, by the way, before I broke on that and didn't home educate when I'm like this. I already held this conviction. It's one of the reasons we live in Alberta, right? You can home educate anywhere, but we knew we didn't know enough to know what we don't know, and that we might home education didn't always work for me. Home education wasn't always the correct fit for my wife. We were both home educated some. Neither of us were home educated all the way through because there were points in our lives where it wasn't the right fit. So we knew enough to know what we didn't know and to say we need to live in a place that is flexible enough that we'll be able to find what will fit for our child. And that was clearly among the options that we had. That was clearly Alberta.
Well, and let me attack it from the other side too, is that just because the pastor's up there and he has his MDiv or DDiv or however many, letters you can put at the end of the name, at least in the United States, and I believe this is in all 50 now, that teachers either have to be striving towards or hold a master's degree. And so just because there's a holding of a piece of paper, there's I think he's an economist, Brian Kaplan. He wrote a book called The Case Against Education, Why Education System is Wasting Time and Money. And he talks about how, these college degrees tend to be more of a signaling feature. So look at me, I'm smart, you can trust me with this job. I have this piece of paper saying as such. And then you go through pretty much 6 months of training, learning the job that they need to invest in you for you to be what I call at my job, a real person, a real boy, a real girl. and so you watch teachers and okay, they might have, 7 master's degrees, but then they need to learn how to do a lesson plan or teach to 30 kids or, all this stuff. So yeah. Having that piece of paper isn't a thing that says, oh, I'm better than you, parent, because I went to school for 6 years for this. That might be true for education, but can you tell me that you can teach the water cycle the best, or do you need to plan it out the week before in order to teach it because you haven't done it before? So the right. Education signal is just there and shouldn't be used against you. Maybe years in, like, oh, I've been a science teacher for 72 years and I've taught ever since the water cycle was just two things. but now, you might have an argument against that. But again, the
water cycle got much easier when the firmament broke and the flood happened.
Exactly. But having someone specialized, so like we took our oldest to a speech therapist to help her with her speech, and it worked wonders. And we already paid our taxes, so we didn't feel, oh, well, is this us giving up our authority to this teacher? I was right there. I took her to all her appointments. I stood within, I wasn't in the room, but I allowed the teacher who I talked to before and at the end of each lesson to explain what was going on, being that active and knowing she had the ability and the education and the experience to help, and it did. And so there it is of, I don't know how to play the piano, but it's not subverting my authority to take my kids to a piano player who plays well and teaches it well if it helps my child learn that skill for the greater glory.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had the exact same experience with our second oldest with regards to speech therapy, and that was one of those things where they're used to parents not being all that involved, right? Because of the level of gap in knowledge there, much more, or at least much more obviously to a parent, between a parent and a grade 1 teacher, first grade teacher. So much more obviously, there's a much more obvious to the parent knowledge gap between the parent and the speech pathologist as opposed to an elementary level, especially teacher. And so they're used to parents sort of sitting back. And so they were like, so we'll meet. So like your son's team is like 8 people large and we'll all have a Zoom call and we'll all talk about it and it'll take about 20 minutes. I'm like, I don't think so. And they go, well, you know, most parents, they only really have enough questions for it to last 20 minutes. I'm like, okay. Let's assume I'm not most parents. And let's assume that I know, and I quoted the exact dollar figure. Let's assume I know how much of my tax money is walking in the door with my kid. And let's assume I know that 84% of Alberta parents are happy with their child's IPP, individualized. I don't remember what PP stands for. The 84% of Alberta parents are happy with their kids' IPP, meaning chances are really good. If I'm not happy with this one, I should just go somewhere else, and chances are really good I'll be happy at the next one. And let's just assume I have more questions than the average parent. So they're like, okay, well, we'll still schedule you for 20 minutes, but we'll put you in front of an appointment we can move. I'm like, you should do that. You should expect that appointment's getting moved. But yeah, it is a different level. And by the way, with speech pathology, totally makes sense to me that the credentialing actually makes a difference.
Sure.
I wanted to throw in. Yeah. I wanted to throw in the little factoid, and that would be true. So my boy had a speech pathologist, an occupational therapist, like ran the whole gamut. And I can totally believe that there are a lot of specialized skills there that are actually the subject of direct like skill style training that you would get in a higher education context. For regular classroom instruction, I just wanted to throw in the fact that I know, since I do this for a living, the degree that the teacher walks into the room with has no bearing. Like the research is pretty conclusive about this, has no bearing on how good the teacher is going to be, which actually means from an economic standpoint that our school systems should hire as few people with as few people with a degree past a bachelor's as possible, because the way their contracts are negotiated, despite the fact that that the research is pretty conclusive that a master's doesn't make you a better teacher and a PhD really doesn't make you a better teacher. Despite that fact, the pay raises are built into the contract. So we should absolutely be advocating for as few credentials as possible in K-12 education, because it's much more cost effective. And this is, by the way, I think this, I can't remember which state this was. I think this was a state and not Canada, but it could have been Ontario actually, where they had an actual astronaut. I think this was Arizona. They had an actual astronaut who did physics or whatever for NASA, and then worked for NASA, teaching kids about science for NASA. But that when he wanted to open up a micro school or a learning pod, he was not qualified to be a teacher. It's like you literally have the most ridiculous set of facts there.
Yeah.
Where
and we do that for college too. Like we don't make the economics teacher teach physics. We make the guy who does physics on his off days. be the teacher for that. So you have someone who's interacting with it, and they might have proclivities to other avenues. So, you don't expect the Keynesian to teach Austrian economics, but you kind of hope that Paul Krugman has heard of a Bob Murphy before, especially with all the shots that Bob Murphy takes at Paul Krugman. And so you kind of hope that at least there's some surpassing knowledge there, and they could deride it all they want. And at least there's the knowledge base there. But when you're talking education, from what I understand, no one's going, okay, this is how to be a good teacher. This tends to be or this is how to teach English, or what do you do when you have the bully sitting next to the kid he bullies? There's nothing in that education that is preparing you for those specific requirements. And so I've talked to teachers pre-pandemic, pre-lockdowns is what I should say, and they're like, I wish parents would get involved, and they're just not there. But then parents saw their education during the lockdowns and then got mad, and then went to school board meetings and had the audacity to question these educators, these heroes. And it's like, well, which one did you want? And also, those parents are now asking, why can't my teenager read? And so that divorce from the parent and the child, why does that parent now? It's true. Why does that parent now care that their kid couldn't read? How do you not know that about your kid? Aren't you sitting down with them and reading with them, reading to them? I mean, are you just offloading? It's not one size fits all, but also if you're a parent that's divorced from their kids, I mean, are you qualified to call yourself a parent? Barring, I'm a single mother because my husband got shot and killed, and I didn't know I was in this situation, and I'm just trying to feed my 5 kids and all those caveats. But once you suddenly start learning and then caring, you see what the power of ticked off parents can do over these last 3 years. And, we've seen that National Home Education Research Institute and the U.S. Census Bureau says that there were 3.7 million homeschool students in 2020 and 2021 for K-2 through 12. And that grew to, and before that, there was 2.5 million. So we saw a growth of, almost 2 million people going that way. And even more so for Black students going from more traditional public schools to 100% homeschooling or some variation thereof. And I think that's pretty drastic changes. If you weren't going to point this out, I was that in the United States, by far the largest cohort of new home educators were Black Americans in high union power states. So states like Michigan would be a high union power, although less so than it was years ago. But, right, true.
You had some reforms there, but I can't remember.
We still got those bailouts, though.
Yeah, but the measure. Cordialis, among others, did a study where they applied sort of a standard accepted measure of union power in a state that's been done for right to work, to measure right to work legislation or whatever, that's been used in other fields of economics, and applied those measures to see if COVID spread or union power better predicted school closures. And hint, it was union power and it wasn't close. COVID spread had no predictive value for school closures at all. But union power had quite strong predictive value and so unsurprisingly, it is the high union power states where you saw especially minority families, because it's not even just Black families, but especially minority families moving to home education. And home education was never as white and Christian as its opponents like to claim or like to paint it as, but it certainly became way less white and probably less Christian over the course of the pandemic, which I consider a very positive thing, and something similar happened here, similar in size happened here, and I consider it a good thing because when you've got new demographics, new whole sets of people going into home education and liking it and sticking with it, because you didn't see a big rebound in those numbers, at least not here. I didn't pay as close attention to the States, but I think I saw people saying that the numbers didn't snap back really. And so liking it and sticking with it, that then you have whole new sets of people who know a home education family. And like I'd be interested to see what the overall change in the number of people in Alberta, in America, who say that they know a family that home educates. I would be interested to see how much that number has grown, because first of all, awareness that the family home educates probably has gone up. But then there are a lot more families in different social circles now than the more predictable ones that are home educating. And I consider that just so good for the future, because as coming at it largely from the policy side, the state is going to state. You always have to worry about regulations, and liberty does not exist on paper. You can't write it into policy. You can't make a law that will establish liberty. Liberty can only exist in the hearts of the people. So the more people actually know a home educator and would be upset if harm came to them, the more safe from regulation home education is. And so I consider that a fantastic thing.
Yeah, it definitely destigmatized, I think, a lot too, where families who home educated were more apt to, first of all, make memes. The Great Meme War showed us that I'm the homeschool parent you were afraid of, and also the whole socialization thing is like, well, look what you guys did for the past 3 years. My kids aren't as messed up as what you think they are. The public school failed in homeschooling. And you can take their word for it that it was because they were thrust into the position. They had no way of doing this except for that's what the unions push for as well. And then also, it drove people to say, oh, what are those schools doing? Is sitting somebody down in front of 6 hours? But my neighbor, their kids are playing outside after 3, and they know just as much as my kids do, if not more. And they're spending, an hour, 2 hours, depending on your age of homeschooling day. And I think this is a further down the road one, but that's one of the misconceptions about homeschooling or something like that. You don't always have to be traveling to be a good homeschooler. Right. You don't always have to fill up your time. And once you're done, think about what it takes to teach 30 kids of different ones. And let's put the best intentions in that teacher. They want to teach all of them, and let's put good intentions on the students. That's 30 people with questions of doing it again, and you're filling up essentially a full-time job of 40 hours that you have to do. When you're a parent, you're always going to be a parent. You might not always like your kids, but they're always stuck in the same house as you, unfortunately. And you can take a shower and come back to them, and you're done educating them after 2 hours because you've hit everything for the day, and they're not at a loss. So I think that's one of the things where people kind of get that misconstrued of homeschooling has to look like public education because, and this coming from me too, is that's all I knew. I went to Catholic private school, but Catholic private school and public education, other than quality, is still the same fill up your hours, do it. And now it's like, oh, my kids are done in 2. I feel like I should be doing more. That's not true. So even if you wanted to send them to 2 parents in the household have to work, totally understand that. Babysitter, daycare for 8 hours, come home for the 2 hours that you are doing from time to come home to working, depending on age. There's your homeschool time. And it doesn't have to be another 8 hours. It's not another job that you have to do. And so the nervousness of that, and saying, why can my neighbor do what the teacher does better in 2 hours than it takes 8 hours? So,
well, and one-on-one would be one of the major
absolutely
differences.
Yeah,
is the teacher, almost by definition, is going to have to teach the same material in more different ways because of the different kinds of learners, which is not, by the way, the traditional learning styles that you heard. That's not well substantiated in research, but
in general,
it's
yeah,
analogous to that. Okay, like
right.
Different ways of presenting material are going to be necessary because some kids will just get it one way and some kids will get it another way. The more kids you have in the class, the more of those you're going to have to do to make sure that everyone's following along. Not to mention that if someone is struggling after all those ways are presented, then you need to slow down and help that one student get it and all that. So the one-on-one attention definitely, especially reading in the early grades, and things go so much faster the more one-on-one attention. And by the way, one of the most overwhelming differences is science of reading researchers have actually almost forgotten the importance of this because it's so assumed in that field now that sometimes they'll forget that regular people don't know this. is that having knowledge about the thing you're reading is going to improve your reading and your ability to learn to read so much better than. So before we hit record, we were talking about how kids in the early grades are just sponges of facts and information and memorization, and so that's why you hit them with catechism when they're young. While their mind is just poised for memorization, you do a lot of memorization. I've most of my scripture memorization was done between the ages of 6 and 12, right? It's like most of the verses I remember today, I still remember in King James Version because that's how I memorized them.
Yeah.
Between the ages of 6 and 12. And I've done scripture memorization since, but a lot less. Like it's still very tinged.
Learning a second language is done better at a younger age.
Yeah.
Second generation immigrant families know this perfectly. They're the translators for their parents or their grandparents because they had to pick up English sooner and they also learned their first language.
Right. And so to have kids be able to read about things that they already know things about, so they have a knowledge base to understand some of the new information that they're taking in to help to aid with comprehension, and things that they actually care about. Right. I just this week, it occurred to me that my kid cheats a lot on phonics, right? Cause she looks, she looks at the pictures and she'll just guess words. And she won't actually look. And I realized she is also extremely interested in Pokemon. And yes, there are some hints by looking at the Pokemon. although she got Golduck and Psyduck right, which are backwards of what the visual hints would be. So that tells me that she wasn't cheating quite so much. And so I just realized this week that, okay, if we go through and we read Pokemon manuals, that this is something she's super interested in, where she can't cheat on the phonics, or she can't cheat much on the phonics. Mm-hmm. Some of them she knows the names of, so whatever, and those don't count. But there are a bunch of them that she doesn't know, and so she has to actually try to read, and you have to do it. You have to do it by phonics because the they aren't real words, right?
Right. Yeah.
We're not going to have memorized these words, and so so anyway, but so that's a combination of like a challenge that we were running into with her reading, which was that she's just guessing too much and not trying to sound things out, and fitting to her interests because she's very interested in Pokemon. And so that's the sort of thing that in one-on-one is so much easier, which is why, by the way, even at the public school, they should be breaking down into groups and doing a lot of one-on-one reading with the teacher and helpers and whatever. Anyway, because in the very early grades, you need that one-on-one attention to learn reading. But that's, for home education, that's all it is. So it can be so much faster, so much more efficient, so much more effective.
Yeah, and when you fail, there's the ability to take a step back and reset. So like when we were doing sight words, sight words, you just need to look at it and know it so that it helps you, because these are the most commonly used words. Well, we found out that our very good memorizer was memorizing positions in the on the app that we were using. And so we decided, okay, we need to use flashcards and break them up and be able to rearrange them so that she wasn't. But there was like a 6 month period that we had wasted because we found out that our 3-year-old, 4-year-old was memorizing the words in their place. And that's why she was struggling in the areas where she was. And so we said, all right, let's start back over. And she was able to catch back up, not in 6 more months, but in 2 months, because we had already laid foundations of recognizing sight words and stuff like that. And then she had gotten older and realizing, oh, my system doesn't work that way. So I'll fight it. I'll kick against the goad until there's no goad to kick, and then learn it the way that you're supposed to. And so, and that's one of the things that I also wanted to bring up in our conversation too, is as parents, we need to give the grace to our students, our kids, to fail. And it's one of the things. So I asked my daughter before we started, what's something that you like about homeschooling? And she knows, enough about public school from TV shows to amass somewhat knowledge. And she said that she likes not having grades, and she doesn't work well with that understanding. And to me, that's all I've known. It is the grading process. And so I know if I got a B, well, I know 80%, but then there's 20% I didn't know. And so she doesn't realize that she can't get away with that. But in her mind, that's a positive thing, because the weight of that grade is off of her, and she's able to concentrate more on knowing things. And so she's hard on herself when she doesn't know something, but it's that reinforcement of it's okay to fail, because that's where we know to concentrate on and to also pick a different way of knowing. And that should be for us as well as parents, is, okay, if homeschooling isn't working for you, let's try a co-op. Let's try a specialization. Let's see if teaching music, if there's a way of, repetition or hearing and practicing, or, those ways of introducing new concepts, and see if like you were saying, learning from somebody else is better, and then we can pick what's best. But we're still the primary motivators for that education of being the one that says, you are going to this because I'm I'm a good father who's in charge of my family, who's doing what God wants me to by making sure that you get the best education and you're reading to a librarian because they're specialized in one-on-one reading for that hour. So it's okay for them to fail, and it should also be okay for us to fail because it's so much easier for us to pick ourselves back up and go, all right, where did we go wrong? What can we do? And the amount of one of the also good things economically we talked about is that there's so much out there for us to put on.
That's right.
And so now it's almost too hard because it's like, well, what curriculum do I pick?
Yeah.
Just know you're probably going to waste some money in what you pick because what worked for one kid might not work for the other. You might want half of one and half of the other, and just go with something and see if that's what you like and see if that's what you want to teach and see if that's the best way for kids to learn. And then you're out $40. So, get the base level and then you can add the modules to it if you want to.
Yeah, absolutely. And ultimately, there is so much out there that is good that if you just know what to look for, so you're looking for a knowledge-rich, fact-rich curriculum. You're looking for phonics in reading. You're looking for direct decoding math instruction and not discovery math. If you know what you're looking for, and then there are a broad range of curricula that will be positive in that direction. And you don't have to sweat too much if you got the exact best one, because we have such a wealth of these materials now. It's like, this was not always the case. There's so for so long, well, I mean, even when you and I were quite young, to find a phonics core reading curriculum would have been a challenge, because the fad was so strongly in the other. Yeah. Now it's super easy, and in fact, now most public schools have a phonics rip.
I remember our class was our Catholic school was the last one, and it was always the phonics with the little rhino eraser on top of the books that we had through it all, and that's what drove me to phonics, because I learned to read so quickly through that, and my families were big readers, and so if you have a family that desires to read, especially with your kids, especially early, it's fun, and you might have to do Berenstain Bears, which you're like, pick a short book, and then they don't pick a little critter. They pick Berenstain Bears that has a lot of words. Yeah. Oh. But, then it's you're going to turn it over to them and they're going to start sounding stuff out.
Right. Yeah. And my kids already, by the way, are getting into the Tuttle Twins series, but not in one sitting.
Yeah.
Those books are too dang long for kids, my kids.
Especially if they watch the show first and then you pick the book.
Which we haven't done, in part because I want to get through the books, and I want to, because so my kids are a little more interested in politics and government and that kind of thing for kids their age than they normally would be, because of what their daddy does for a living, because they know that I do this for a living, and that it's interesting to me, and they like me most days. Right. And so there's a little more I've got a little more, like, again, it's, I find it one of the worst ideas is to find age level readers and always stick to a leveled reader. Go up and down outside the level based on interest.
Yeah.
Based on interest, because that's the important part. And even if your kid is in a reader that's below their level, if it's something in their interest, then it will help more than a leveled reader that is not in their interest. Mm-hmm. And so, but then certainly if you're working in their interest, you can go above their level of reading, and actually their level of knowledge of that subject area, their level of interest of that subject area will carry them a lot further than you think. Mm-hmm. Again, like I say, like, researchers forget that parents and politicians don't know this. It's so well established. But
yeah, it's also why early development programs fail, because parents then offload that responsibility to teachers and then never reinforce it when they're at home for the other 16 hours that they're there. But I was just going to say, playing Roblox, is you're reading typed words faster, and I don't correct unless if I'm reading it along with her, and if she's just reading it, but she's trying it and she's learning it and she's playing that same game over and over again, so that way next time you realize, oh, she's reading better and she's reading faster and quicker, and it's just interesting putting roadblocks in Roblox, and in Roblox kind of to get them out of their comfort zone is not something that you find in the 30-person classroom, because there's nothing curtailed to that one person. You might put them in an AP class, you might put them in a advanced level reader or something like that. But I mean, I think about in my early school years, all the people that were in the advanced classes, except for one, ended up being burnouts for the advanced classes. And so the precursors of today aren't always to point us to where our students will be, but it's giving them the tools to then teach themselves as we get further along. We're talking about young kids who are just starting out, but even older kids, you end up having a curriculum that's designed for self-learning. And so this helps to reinforce it. And you might not be able to go there if you're just starting out today and your high schooler has known nothing but public school and is going into it. But the challenges there are going to be the same but different.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, it's funny, the way we set up the factory model schooling, you mostly get more branching out in the higher grades, when arguably it's even more valuable in the lower grades.
Yeah.
And policymakers are extremely resistant to that, because it sounds like you're saying that some kids are going to be set up for a lifetime of smooth sailing academically and some kids aren't, which is not necessarily correct. But I can see why and there's a lot of opposition even to having a college bound, non-college bound, or anything, even tracking is considered a big faux pas in the educational community, even in the higher grades now. And so certainly in the lower grades, people would go ballistic, but it doesn't have to be tracking. It's not about again, quality is not about position on a 100-degree scale. It's about fit for a kid. And that's so much there's so much of the losing sight of that education is ultimately about an individual kid. and that yes, we we might have 30,000 of these individual kids that we're trying to put through this school division, but that education is ultimately about an individual kid learning, and that's where
the permanent record model, I think, trips us up, because we think, oh, I've got a straight A student, they're in the honor roll, they're this, but do they have command of the material? And also, I think, and it's one of the things that I tend to want to emphasize in my school choices, is cross promotion of the material. Can they take the history into the geography? Can they take the geography into the languages? Can they take the math into the history? And build out and up and build upon those things and say, oh, this happened in the year 800 when, Charlemagne was crowned, the main dude. What else was happening around there? And what do we see economically? What else do we see just socially that changed the norms? Or, the roads of Rome helped lead out the gospel. The economics of Rome helped to disseminate the gospel when that's not what they wanted. But then, boom, the temple's destroyed, and they don't have a choice but to deal with this new cult of Judaism that has come out of it. And so, seeing those things as an adult, going, oh, I wish I would have known that younger. Well, now I have the ability to inflict those ideas onto my children. Yeah, exactly. And just building upon and seeing it cross promoted and retained. How many of us, and it happened to me too. I was more into a math major before I switched, where my simple math was a lot more complex than it is today, where I'm like, all right, 8 times 3 is 16, 24. Okay. Yeah, before it would have been like, oh, I can do a polynomial in my head. And so utilizing that, and then if you get the good cross promotion, you're more apt to use it. You're more likely to read a book on theology and then apply it to history, and then take a fiction book and realize, oh, what from this worldview of this person is this saying about them socially, culturally? What was their background? And putting things in context historically, going, oh, this person's an Asian writer, and they come from Vietnam. What did Vietnam in the 60s look like? All these things cross promote themselves, and I think that's what we lose when we have teacher A teaching a whole slew of things that they have to then grade. And then go, well, you're a B. Well, a B ranges from 80 to 90. So that means you're missing 20% out. Or you have teachers that teach only one subject, and they're just concerned about their subject, which might be good for them and their requirements. But for that student who needs that connection, or who doesn't need that connection, depending on who that student is, I think it shows the benefits of, if not homeschooling, but personalizing as much as possible, because that's what you would want too, as a person who wants to learn new things. You don't want to learn everybody else's job at your new job. You want the specifics, and then you want to build out from there and go, oh, if I need a part B, then I go to this department for it, and then see how that works into it. So.
But see, that's where you're wrong, Patrick, because now you can get social studies in every subject. The exact social studies they want you to learn will now be every word problem in math, everything you read in language arts, everything, every scientist you learn about will either be diverse in the way their pigment aligned itself, or diverse in the way they use their genitals, because now you're getting social studies in every subject. So they have solved this problem for you now, Patrick.
Yes, that's true. That's true. But at some point we have to realize the colonizers won, and to him go the spoils of victory. So,